even though that it was trading at like 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up until 12 cents earlier in the year. One of the reasons that it's been so low has been because so much hex was sent to this ICO scam, and they are expected to sell that. They've staked some of that hex, so they're expected to just dump the yield on the market continuously, so they never really even have to spend any of the hex that they receive. They can just use the built-in staking and yield function and just dump the hex on the market for like millions of dollars a year. They're never going to have to work again in their lives if hex has any value, and they can just dump it slowly without even touching their principal. I think if they touch their principal, hex nukes to zero, so they've just staked it instead so that they can accumulate more. But this how Bank X deals with this huge amount of hex supply that they got from the God Whale has sort of put a dampener on how the hex sort of the hex price overall. So they sort of kept the entire hex community hostage by through people not knowing what they're going to do with hex, which has led to people investing in a bunch of other coins in the Pulsechain ecosystem, which has led to a fracture within the Pulsechain ecosystem itself, because within the cult of hex, you're not being a proper community member unless you're buying Richard Hart branded specific coins. And there are 4 coins like that. There's hex on Ethereum, there's hex on Pulsechain, there's a Uniswap fork has its own coin called Pulsex, and then there's this incentive token for that Uniswap clone that's called Ink. And those are the 4 holy hex coins that you're allowed to buy. But because all of these coins are sort of correlated to the hex price, and hex has been kept hostage by this Bank X ICO scam, then these coins haven't really done that well. Honestly, I don't know if these coins would have done well anyway, because I mean this launch of Pulsechain was sort of the holy land, which Richard kept teasing them with for 2 years. And now that it's finally here, what usually happens is that you figure out that now you have this chain, and what's next? Like the only thing that you can do is sort of trade these coins with each other, and then what? Like the hex community hasn't really grown that much, so I don't really know if hex would have done that well anyway. But this BankX scam that has had this massive amount of hex that people are afraid that they're going to dump on the market has worsened things. Which has led to community members investing in other like non-Richard Hart coins, and people are trying to. I mean, people in this ecosystem are basically just trying to survive and make a living for themselves in different ways. And the only thing that they've taught themselves how to do over the last couple of years is like buy hex and stuff like that. So they're trying to come up with other coins launched on Pulsechain that they can invest in and take money from each other. But that has now led to a fracture within the Pulsechain ecosystem, because as soon as you buy a non-Richard Hart branded coin and you say, I've invested in this, and I believe in this particular Pulsechain coin, then you will get shunned from a part of the Hex community and the Hex cult. And these people are already pretty vulnerable people, living in the fringes of society. You have to remember that all of these hexicans sort of got together on the basis of that they were the outcasts of society already. So you have these people watching Richard Hart streams, and there's this. It's the same kind of guy that it's the same category of person that falls for, like, becomes an Andrew Tate simp and joins the Hustle University for Andrew Tate. That same type of individual is the kind of individual that is flocked around the Richard Hart ecosystem. So it's not going that great for those kinds of people in society. And what they found in the Pulsechain ecosystem is, and in the Richard Hart ecosystem, is they found a lot of they found each other, basically. So what they built a community, and the big thing for them, as much as Richard Hart has been this central character, has also been just, I'm a weirdo, you're a weirdo, we both got duped into this by Richard Hart, so now I have a friend. So we're not weirdos, we're friends. And so the Pulsechain ecosystem and the Richard Hart, the Hex ecosystem, has been one of the most vibrant communities of people that traditionally has not that much to do with Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else. They got in through Richard Hart streams. They spread in these sort of trailer park societies of society, and came together and met each other. They have meetups, and they're really like one of the most colorful and passionate communities, and they've all staked their future on this. So when they can't buy these Richard Hart branded coins anymore because they're all being kept hostage by the bank X address, and they have to invest in other coins, it fractures not only the Pulsechain community, but you have to realize that this is their entire lives. So getting shunned from the Pulsechain community as a Pulsechain person may not sound as much, but this is like, it's a big deal for these people. So it's been the last couple of months have not been that good for Hex community members and Pulsechain. There's been a lot of fracturing, and people that were already on the fringes of society, that were already lost, and now this SEC case comes in, and this really, it's going to be bad, even worse for those people. And my heart goes out to them. I mean, I don't think you're not an evil person just because you believe in what Richard Hart says. Richard Hart is one of the best manipulators on that I've ever met in my entire life. So you don't have to be mentally disabled or anything like that to believe in Richard Hart. You just have to be like a little bit dumber than Richard Hart is to believe in that. And
Eric, I said this earlier before I think you joined the room, but I had many private conversations with high-level Bitcoin maximalists, all the people we know on Twitter, and myself and everyone else included in these conversations. We had basically no answer for Richard. Richard was just too good at what he was doing. He knew our entire playbook. He was wildly charismatic. And so, yeah, I want to co-sign what you said, that like, if people fell for it, this guy was a real fox in the hen house, and it was very difficult to, fight back against him if you were a weaker individual.
Yeah, and I've fought with this so much myself, because my own personal history is that I met Richard at a bunch of different crypto conferences. I like colorful and controversial people, so I would have fun with Richard at those conferences, and I think, I consider Richard a personal friend of mine. And when I saw how Richard destroyed all these other Bitcoin maximalists, and I learned his arguments, I learned the way that he argued, and if you want to save like a Hexican person, or if you want to like get them to realize sort of the dangers of this, then what most Bitcoin maximalists did, like Giacomo Zucco and Stefan Livera and Peter McCormack and all the other guys that debated Richard, what they did was just so counterproductive. It just made like watching Richard crush the arguments of these people on his streams is just made the Hexagons believe that they were on the right side of history, and that they had the winning arguments, which they had. I mean, if you look at those videos, like I can personally go back and watch Richard Hart destroy Peter McCormack just because it's really funny to watch that video. So if you want to debate Richard Hart, for the first thing, never debate him on stream, because when he publishes the video, you're going to be this tiny little video with poor audio, and he's going to have this massive setup that he has with great video quality, great audio quality. If you get agitated, you can't even really hear what you're saying. And this is what happened to all these other guys. So just the setting of the debate itself always has to be in person. You have to be. So if you look at the interviews that I did with Richard, it's always face to face next to him, so that both of us have the same audio.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
So and the other thing that I did differently was, like, if you just say that Hex is a scam or a Ponzi, well, Hex is none of those things, right? Hex is a heavily slanted game that it's like a roulette table with a big slot that's green, and every time that it's green, that money goes to Richard Hart. So if you, for example, stake your Hex, and then you have to unstake, if you want to unstake it early, then half of the penalty. So how Hex works is that you stake Hex. If you unstake it too soon, before your term is up, you can pay all of it or a part of it as a penalty, and half of the penalty goes to Richard Hart. So there's all these sort of triggers and hooks inside the Hex staking system itself that, like, even despite of the fact that Richard, when he did the ICO for Hex, did this recycling of the funds, so he bought Hex in his own ICO with the money that he received from other people over and over again. Despite doing that and getting 95% of the supply that way, the hex system itself has these hooks where there's basically like a green spot on a roulette table, and every time the ball that ends there, then the person loses the money and it goes to Richard. So what hex is, it's not like to design a system that works like that and transparently works like that. Like this was not. I mean, maybe maybe the fact that Richard was recycling the funds, maybe he wasn't explicit about that, but that there's one address that controls 95% of the supply. That's like public information, and that this same address gets half of the penalty when you unstake your hex. That's also public information. So if someone designs a smart contract and says this is how it works, like can a piece of code be a scam if it's like it's not a rug in the sense that there's not a trap door that opens and takes your funds. It's just if you play the game, it's heavily slanted in the favor of the address that launched the system. That's not necessarily a scam. That's not, and that doesn't fall into the category of a Ponzi scheme either. So if you want to debate with these people, then you probably shouldn't go in swinging and saying you're a scammer, blah blah blah. Like how is a person that perhaps bought a bit of hex a couple of years ago and then the value went up and they made money from this? How are you going to convince that person that they're being scammed? You can't, right? So my whole strategy with like how do I approach the hex community? How do I reach out to those people? Well, I did it differently. So I became a part of the hex community instead. Everything that they were right about, I conceded to, and I sort of made myself a part of the community over a number of years. Speaking with these people, getting to know them, going to some of their meetups, and becoming their friend. And many of the Hexicans peoples are my friend. Many of them are in the Hex community are great and hilarious people. For example, the guy who made the rap diss song. I don't know if you've seen that. There's this. His name is Freddie Quotes, and he made this great rap song about all the haters of Hex when it was at the top. So there's really fun, like hilarious, interesting, really warm, like among this hex community. One of the things that I've noticed, like if you aren't their friend, yes, they're horrible people, but if you are their friend, they're really, really warm. And I think this comes from this fact that I was talking about previously, how many of these are like outcasts of society. So what I did differently is that I leveled with these people, conceded to the things that they were right about, and then tried to make my stance on hex over a number of years and trying to show all the times that Richard were lying to them. So every time that Richard Hart said, for example, that that he raised $1 billion so that he could hire a bunch of devs and create a better Ethereum, but in the end he just copy pasted Ethereum. He didn't launch proof of stake before, which he kept saying that he was going to do. He kept saying that Ethereum was going to be a disaster full of bugs, but in the end he just copy pasted and said it was great. So all these, he also said that Hex was going to go to $1 million, and now it's like less than 1 cent. All those things, I just kept, making videos of that and saying, well, Richard is not infallible though. Like the things that he says to you, here's black on white all the times that he keeps deceiving you. And you can be a part of the Hex community, you can be a part of the Pulsechain community. I don't care, but please don't take insane risks trusting this person with the future of your family. So that was sort of my strategy, and I hope that I was more successful than.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Eric. How do you feel that you made a meaningful impact, or do you feel like it was kind of a waste of your time?
I don't know. I did the best of my ability, what I could. I really put an effort into it, but I think that maybe what I've done is just kept drawing attention to Richard Hart and to Hex, and maybe by doing that, who knows? Maybe I caused more damage than the amount of people that I was able to, decrease.
That's the problem, right? There's always a Streisand effect to engaging with any of this shit. One of the reasons, I chose personally not to engage with it at all because it never even cracked the top 200 shitcoins. So to me, it was like, the less we engage with this, the more quickly it will die on the vine. But then, sometimes you leave these things alone and they grow out of control like a wildfire. So there really is no correct answer, I think.
Credit to the exchanges. They never really listed Hex. I mean, all these years, all these attempts, they've consistently denied. So at least there was that.
Yeah, even if you take out the supply that was owned by Richard, the Hex market cap went to like $10 billion, and it was one of the largest. It was in the top 10. It's still, even if you take out Richard's supply now, Hex is still like multiple billions of dollars, which puts it fairly in the top 15 cryptocurrencies. So Hex has been one of the most successful schemes that has ever ran.
How come when I go to CoinMarketCap I never see it listed that
I'll
high?
explain. I'll explain that. So, because the Hex supply is so large, and there's not a lot of trading volume going on for Hex, because Hex isn't on centralized exchanges, you can only trade it through Uniswap, and because the relative amounts of Hex that are in the hands of people are insignificant compared to the supply that Richard Hart owns, these coin rating sites, they have this security sort of policy built into them where you can't print, you can't have a coin and have like trillions of dollars, trillions of units of supply, and then trade it for one, like make one trade one time, and now it goes to the top of all these ranking sites. So these sites have protections against that, such that the relative volume compared to the market cap must reach a specific threshold. And because Hex doesn't reach any of those thresholds, they put it at the in CoinMarketCap. You can't go above 200 unless you have more than a specific amount of volume in relation to your supply. In relation to your market cap. So Hex reaches the spot of 201 because that's how far up you can come when you have this huge portion of the supply that is circulating but is not a part of the trading volume. So it's because of the low relative trading volume that Hex doesn't show up. There was one site which did things differently, which was called Nomics. I don't know if it's still around. I'm going to check real quick on my computer. I think that they might have... No, sorry, Nomic was the name of the site. I think Nomic went down recently, though. Yeah, I think Nomic went down. That was the one site that actually displayed Hex. They had a bunch of... They really spent a lot of effort in trying to put Hex correctly, like taking out the coins owned by Richard, and Hex was on the top 10 of Nomics for a long time. I don't know where it would have been right now if it was still there, but I think that Hex is still in like the top 20 because there's still like $1 or $2 billion in Hex at the moment. I'm going to check real quick what the actual market cap.
Eric, you've been around for a while. Are there other people that are public? Like, he was always very careful to protect the names of the devs, the names of his people that were part of the insider team. And this suit names, like either Hart or some of his insiders were directed to make these recycling transactions. Like, do you know of other names involved, or is it all tight? Has he kept everything private?
I've been able to find some of the devs that has been working on Pulsechain, just because in the debates that I've had with Richard, he keeps pretending that the devs are really good, and my opinion is that no real good dev would ever work with Richard Hart. So I did spend some effort, trying to figure out. I probably have some screenshots somewhere. I found some people in Czechoslovakia, well, how do you pronounce it? The Czech Republic. I found a dev there, for example. There's one guy called Brett, who's sort of the lead developer for Pulsechain. He's on Twitter, but we don't know what his real name is. But I found the real names of some people, and they were mostly no-name developers in the fringes of crypto, and most of them were also sort of from not the US and sort of cheaper countries like the Czech Republic. He hasn't really spent top dollar for the developers that he had. It's mostly been no-name developers, either with very little crypto experience or no crypto knowledge at all, which is the reason why it's taken so many years to launch Pulsechain, for example. It took 2 years just to create a carbon copy of Ethereum. So I don't think that there's gonna. I don't know if there aren't any big particular names that are well known, I would say. I don't know if they're going to go after this one guy that Richard contracted to work on Pulsechain. It's not even clear that guy even necessarily knows.
I guess a more interesting question, piggybacking Aaron's question, might be not just devs, but are there any other co-conspirators in the scheme? who are, high level. Is there a Joseph Lubin to Richard Hart's Vitalik?
Yeah, no, it's pretty much a one-man show. Hex is not that complicated of a project, really. If you think about it, Hex is an ERC20 token that had a pretty shitty written contract. Like if you actually look at the Hex source code, it's not written by a genius. It's heavily audited, so no one has been able to exploit it. So this was just like an inexperienced Solidity developer wrote some code. Richard Hart got it audited, and then it's mostly been like a website and all the marketing effort, like a lot of the marketing efforts that has happened for Hex since has been just a result of people, sort of Richard getting an early club of people to collect some Hex and stake it, and then he had these people that sort of had to market Hex. So like it's been a grand operation, but most of them have just been bag holders and not been like conspirators of Richard. So there's been a lot of people involved, but they've been like they're Hex community members, and all Richard had to do was launch an ERC20 token and get it audited, and then market it, and the rest of it is just sort of just followed on after. For Pulsechain, the situation has been different, where he has actually had to contract a lot of developers, but I don't think that there's a huge operation. And if you look at sort of how the whole operation has been functioning, there really hasn't been any oversight over these devs. It's pretty clear that Richard has himself been led astray by the developers, because, I mean, the thing that Richard prides himself on is like being all-knowing, being wise, understanding software development, like knowing what's going on, not being an idiot. But he kept making these incorrect predictions on when he thought Pulsechain was going to launch, because he was trying to understand what his developers were saying. So you can basically imagine like a group of developers working in isolation and basically fleecing Richard out of, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars in development costs to fork Ethereum, even though that this is something that you can pay like a Fiverr developer probably $100,000, and he can give you a fork of Ethereum pretty quickly. So if there was like a Joe Lubin type of character or a Gavin Wood type of character that actually understood software development and knew how to run an efficient software organization, then things wouldn't have gone as poorly as they did for the Pulsechain ecosystem. I think it's sort of evident in how it's been going that this has been mostly a one-man show of a person that's been struggling for a lot of the time that he's been working on this.
I mean, you could have even done it as an open bounty and just be like, here's $250K for the first person who does it, and then it would have gotten done in, I don't know, a matter of weeks, right?
Yeah, but he had to sort of pretend that he needed $1 billion for this, and that there was super genius developers working behind the scenes. So if it was just a bounty and you could see who did it and how long it took, then that destroys the mystery.
I think it's really fortunate Eric's here, because Eric's probably knows more about this topic than anyone in the world. Eric, do you think, so he's been in Greece, he had hotels everywhere, he was on, he never had an address, now he's in Finland. Do you think he's ever going to be served? Do you think he's ever actually going to be located, or can he just keep hotel hopping for another year?
Yeah, so I first of all, even though that I say a lot of negative things about Richard, I do try to be sensitive in not doxing people and revealing where they are physically located, because it just goes against my ethos to like dox people in crypto no matter what they did. I just try not to do that. I did make a bet one time with Richard about him not being able to go to the US. Because Richard hadn't been, when I made the bet with Richard, this was in 2022, last year, Richard hadn't been in the US since 2006. And I can't really understand, like, if you are from the US, you have family in the US, and all your community, all the Pulsechain community and the Hex community is most of them are in the US and has these meetups for you in the US, why wouldn't you go there? And what he said was that he thinks that the US is really dangerous, that like in the US you can get stopped and someone can hold a gun to your head, and like it's just a dangerous country. From my point of view, Richard doesn't really strike me as this person who's like, oh, I can't go outside in the United States because someone's gonna rob me. Like, all you have to do not to get robbed is don't flex your Rolexes everywhere. You're gonna be fine.
No,
So
Eric was for the women. The women abroad were better, right? That was the reason.
yeah, but you can still go to the US a couple of times, and
They're not like those. They're not like those European chicks.
Well, the
yeah.
punchline on this, Eric, I remember seeing it on Twitter, is didn't he show up in Miami and collect on the bet?
He did. He went to the U.S. Either he's not like he wasn't suspected of any crime in the U.S. at the time that he went there, and this was I think this was before the subpoenas to ex-community members were starting to be sent around. Yeah, it was. I don't think he has been in the U.S. since this SEC case started, but before that he did go to the U.S. But I've publicly taken the L. I said, apologize that I thought that you couldn't go, because obviously you did. So I was definitely 100% wrong about that. He can go to the US. But there's also, like, if you Google Richard Hart passports, you'll see that this guy has had a number of different passports over the years. And one of the times that I was going to meet with the people that are filming this sort of Tiger King like documentary about Richard. Actually, by the way, if there are any people in the U.S. that want to see a documentary about all of this, on the 4th of August, which is actually like 4 or 5 days from now, there's this documentary called The Highest of Stakes, which are doing. I think they start in Miami showing this movie. And they're going to go from city to city. I would search for The Highest of Stakes, and you can find out where the next like movie screening is nearest to you if you're interested in the subject. So they're going to do like a pre-screening of this movie in different locations around the US. But anyway, what one of the film makers told me when they were actually going to come to Portugal to do like a segment with me to sort of show, like, I was going to be the antagonist of this movie. I think I'm not anymore. I think I just have a minor role. And one of the reasons that didn't happen was because on their way to meet me in Portugal, Richard had some passport issues, is what they told me. So I think that I don't really know what flavor of person has passport issues and can't go to countries, but if I combine it together with this, what I know about what I've seen public information on the internet, that he has had many passports in the past, like maybe maybe it's not that hard to get into the U.S. with another passport than your real one. So I don't know. There's a really interesting background history about what Richard was doing before he came to the crypto scene. That is also public information on the internet, where it seems like he was involved with some businessmen in Panama running some type of company, and then all his business associates basically conspired against him. And according to the entries that he has written on some Panama government website where he's been able to leave comments, he wrote that these business associates, Gustavo Alvarez and a bunch of other names, they turned on him and tried to kidnap him and his girlfriend, and stole all of his belongings and stole the company from him. So he has this background history in Panama that he has talked about also in public, where he was sort of in Panama, and then his business associates all turned out to be criminals and kidnappers and thieves and stole all of his things. And then he sort of went rogue went dark for a while, and then popped up as this sort of crypto guru a bunch of years later.
Yeah, that was always bizarre, the Panama history of, and then the 150 employees, $60 million a year email spam company, something like that. I don't even know what all that was.
Yeah, the spam king. So he ran some Web2 marketing company that did like Viagra spam and stuff like that. And I'm sure it made some money. But if you look at Richard, if you've known Richard, he has always been like all about flexing physical wealth as much as he can. Like even in his early days as sort of entering into crypto, he's always tried to have like the flashiest clothes and the most expensive watches. And when he was in the crypto scene in like 2017, 2018, then he called himself a billionaire. And one time at a conference, I asked Richard, like, when he went up on stage, they called you a billionaire, and he's like, "Yeah, I am a billionaire. I'm a billionaire in sats." So he is always like faked it until he made it in terms of like having crypto wealth. So I think that maybe he was a millionaire before, but he never had nearly as much of as money as he made from Hex. And I think that also became very apparent when he started to flex like Rolex S and Daytona watches and cars. Like if he had the money to do that before, then he would have. And this outrage marketing tactic that he said he was all a part of, even if you go back to his Panama posts, it's pretty clear that Richard was always interested in Rolexes. Like even 20 years ago, he was very interested in Rolexes. So I don't think that it's, oh, I have to buy all these Rolexes because it brings attraction, it brings attention to the project. I think it's sort of clear as day that Richard has had this lifelong dream of owning Rolexes and owning expensive stuff, and that the fact that this brought him attention when he flexed this on Twitter just gave him like his ideal excuse that, wait a minute, I can actually get away with like buying all this stuff with people's money. I think you have to sort of delude yourself that money wasn't coming from Hexicans and that Richard had it all along. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I remember seeing the radio interview where the host says, and people say you're a billionaire, and Richard response was, "You said it." And he would post headlines about billionaire Richard Hart, but he would never like formally claim that he was a billionaire, but he would just allude to references about him being a billionaire.
Yep, and this is straight out from the book, 48 Laws of Power, that you have to seem that you're extremely wealthy, but you can't explain that the reason that you are wealthy is because the people that you are telling it to are the ones giving you the money. So it was a part of the cult creation strategy that they had all along.
That really does sound like Andrew Tate. They must have read the same book.
I think so. I think that they would probably get along very well. Richard and Andrew Tate. They're sort of the same spirit. They have sort of the same spirit animal, I think.
Man, what would that spirit animal be? Just something disgusting and.
It's a snake. It's a snake.
Yeah, but it's like a mutated snake. It's like a Mad Max snake with like 3 penises and like warts all over its body.
Post Chernobyl snake with 2 heads.
Daniel Kravitz did respond to the. He actually made a good case that Richard was Rippy Cheat from this cat in big boots and a sword that's always trying to be very striking.
Oh, you talking about Puss in Boots? Puss in Boots is fly as hell.
Yeah, some fancy cat from some children's story. Yeah, I actually have to go. I'm gonna eat dinner real soon, but it was a pleasure talking to you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. I appreciate it. This was quite informative.
Sure. Take care. Bye bye.